City of Northglenn, Channel 8, keeping you informed of events in your community.
Good evening and welcome to our December 3rd City Council Study Session. Joanna, would you call the roll, please?
Mayor Dodge?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Escobar?
Here.
Councilmember Sowers?
Here.
Councilmember Leidy? Here. Councilmember Downing?
Here.
Councilmember Brown will be absent. Councilmember Whitman will be absent. Councilmember Duran-Molica?
Here.
Councilmember Wilford?
Thank you. All right. Our first item tonight is school safety, critical incident response.
Thank you, Mayor Dodge. And this evening we have representatives from Adams 12 five-star schools with us. Chris Wilderman, who I understand used to be here at Northglenn, so it's always exciting when we have a former staff member come back. We also have Pat Hamilton, Chief Operating Officer with Adams 12, Interim Commander Rice, and then Chief May with us. And I'll let Chris go and introduce the other staff that you have. We were asked to have a study session on the topic of school security, so that's the purpose of this evening's presentation. And then we'll transition into the discussion on council appointee evaluations.
Okay, so thank you again for the opportunity. My name is Chris Wilderman. My title is Director of Safe and Sustainable Environments for Adams 12 five-star schools. That's kind of an umbrella term for several different departments, but everything dealing with student health, safety, environmental health. And so I actually brought most of my emergency preparedness team and security team. So over next to Chief May is Tyler Beal. She's our threat assessment coordinator. In the back over in the corner, I guess we're sort of spread out, is Andy Wyland. She's our emergency preparedness coordinator. And then over here is Jeff Genger, and he is our security services manager. So I'm going to give just a fast and furious overview on this presentation. It's a long presentation, and so I'm not going to linger too long on these areas, but school safety and security, as we practice it these days, is really a huge web of a lot of different resources. So it isn't just cameras and door locks, it's a lot more than that. So it's very much a web of different layers and levels of proactive and responsive action. So we definitely think of school safety and security in three areas. So before any type of a critical incident happens, how we respond during a critical incident, and then how we recover as quickly after. So we're always looking at before, during, and after. Obviously, we're trying to prevent as much as we can, but we also know that we're not going to be able to prevent everything. So we have to have good response protocols in place to be able to respond quickly, and then obviously recover as quickly as possible and get back to normal. So these are some of the departments that form that web for us. So threat assessment in Highlight's world is anytime we have a student who makes some sort of a statement or makes a critical comment, we will pay attention to that. No longer do we assume that it was kids just making comments. Unfortunately, we can't make those assumptions anymore. So our threat assessment coordinator, that's all that Highlight does, is focuses on situations that could be potentially dangerous. Communication center, we don't have our communication lead center here. Her name is Jackie Brown, but we operate a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week, 365 communication center. We monitor our own burglar and fire alarms, and by doing that, we have to have a communication center or a center monitoring those alarms every minute of every day. And so we have a 24-hour communication center. Emergency Preparedness Coordinator, Angie. She is much more in charge of proactive, so trying to make sure that we're compliant with our drills, that schools are doing drills with fidelity, that we are being proactive with some of our state requirements. So we have to do some of the state requirements as part of Colorado law, so FEMA certifications, making sure that our school administrators speak the same language as police and fire. So we are required to do incident command training, 2 levels, ICS 100 and ICS 362. And essentially, like I said, those are just making sure that our school administrators can speak the same language as police and fire. Security Services Manager, Jeff. Jeff is that response guy. So if we have angry students, angry parents, angry people around our campus, angry employees, Jeff is much more of that response. So Jeff helps, and he's our critical liaison with the law enforcement. He does a lot of work with our school resource officers, but his main point is to really try and support the school if there's a critical incident happening, and then he also runs our reunification. So Jeff is kind of that during, all of us are all of these parts, but we really focus, if there is a critical incident, Jeff will take over as our on-site incident commander. He'll work as the liaison with our police departments, fire departments, and then also he's in charge of our reunification. So I don't want to embarrass Pat, but Pat several years ago, about 15 years ago, really set the bar in the state of Colorado and nationally for that matter on the innovative thinking that he was doing. The situation in Columbine, Jim and I were both police officers here when Columbine happened, and you know, we had to learn and we had to start doing things differently. And so after Columbine happened, we did start doing things differently. And then when Platte Canyon happened in 2006, the Adams County was fortunate to be working through a Safe Schools, Healthy Students grant. Don Quick at the time and the sheriff at the time wrote and were granted a $7 or $8 million federal grant that just focused on school safety. And so we were able to collaborate with some of the huge thinkers on school safety at that time. And so we worked with John Michael Keyes, the father of Emily Keyes, who was killed at Platte Canyon. John Michael Keyes is the brother of Heidi. Thank you. Heidi escaped me. Heidi was a sergeant with Broomfield at the time, and so we were able to do a lot of collaboration at that time around school safety, and that's where the SRP came around. So you've heard of the school standard response protocol. So standard response protocol, 4 protocols that can really hopefully help us with any type of critical incident, whether it's man-made, weather-related, whatever that looks like. So that's the lockdown, lockout, shelter-in-place, or evacuation. We've added a new one, so there are actually 5 components. The last one is hold, and I'll talk about that in just a minute, but I'm giving you just a really quick overview here of kind of what we talk about. So this is a little snapshot of Adams 12, 55 schools. That's about 56 now, actually. We have 1 extra school in there now. So for central buildings, just short of 39,000 students, 4,400 employees. We have 2 counties, so obviously Adams County and Broomfield County, 5 municipalities, that's where our name comes from, the Adams 12 5-star school, our 5 municipalities, 5 police departments, sheriff's office, and then 5 fire districts. Threat assessment, like I talked about, probably one of the biggest things, students make comments, so we don't necessarily think that every single student who makes a threatening comment, you know, it's our obligation to dig into what that looks like. Kids make comments, people make comments. So a kindergartner who is frustrated that somebody took one of his or her toys may say something like, "I hope you die." Very different than, you know, a middle schooler or a high school student who plays violent video games, doesn't have parental support, has access to weapons. So that's a lot of what Highlight's job is to find out all those pieces, digging deeper into social media, looking into social media to see what kind of Snapchat and Facebook and, you know, whatever
type of posts that the students have. So we really need to dig in and figure out what that looks like. So our threat assessment process is the schools will do a one-page screen. It's very quick, and that's just kind of a preview to say, do we have anything that leads us to a concern that we need to do a deeper dive into the student. So that kindergartner who makes the comment all the way to that senior who is 2 days away from graduating, if there's some sort of a concerning comment made, a screen will be completed. And then from that point, they take into the totality of all the circumstances with that student and determine if a more in-depth process needs to be made. So we have about a 34-question questionnaire for a full process, and then we can kind of go through and figure out what that looks like. Okay, you can see what the purpose is, just trying to figure out exactly. The end goal for every one of our students in Adams 12 is the same. We want to create a successful environment for our students. So if we have a student that is struggling, we don't want to just suspend or expel that student. We want to find the appropriate resources. So that's a lot of what HILA's job is not just saying that this student is or isn't dangerous, but trying to match appropriate resources to those students. Our goal, and we're making a difference, we have a long way to go, but we really want to cut down on our suspensions and our expulsions. So our goal is to get, there isn't a number that we can put on there, but we've steadily been coming down in our expulsions, and we want to even get better. My goal would be to be, less than 50 expulsions in a school year, which it's an aggressive number. I don't know what our numbers are trending towards this year. I think our numbers last year were about 288. I can find that out, but I think we were right around 288 expulsions last year. So I would really, really like to reduce that to 50 or so. If we had the ability to keep every single student in school, that would obviously be our goal, but there are just some students that are too dangerous or need those resources beyond what we can provide in a comprehensive school. So there will be some students in there, but we really wanted to cut those down as much as possible. So that's kind of it for our threat assessment, our communication center. Like I said, we have 7 operators, dispatchers. Proud to say that we've been 24/7, 365. We haven't been shut down for 20 years, so we've always had people covering that. So that's holidays, that's every single day of the year, snow or sunshine. So it's kind of what we do. So we receive calls. So our main general number, 720-972-4000, rings into the front desk, and we have somebody there during normal business hours. But for after hours, or if a school is in crisis, they can call us directly, and our extension is 4911. So we've had that set up for, like I said, 20 years. So we handle a lot of calls. We monitor.
A real quick comment about that too is the community can call that number as well. So, and we've had community members, if they see suspicious activity on one of the rooftops of our school, that's a frequent one where people decide they want to drink beer and get on the roof of our school for some reason, or start a dumpster fire or something like that. The community can call that number, and someone will always answer that phone.
Yeah.
So I think it's 720-972-4911.
Yeah. You can see on the slide here, we monitor over 20 different systems. So we have camera systems, we have access control systems, we have alarm monitoring. So we monitor our kitchens, so our refrigerators and freezers. Obviously, if we have a power failure and a freezer or refrigerator goes out and then comes back on, we want to make sure that the food is safe. So we have monitors for our HVAC system and our water systems, and we have a lot of different systems. We send mass notifications from our communication center, so we have radio control there. We have interoperability with our police officers through the communication center. And then, like I said, we send out mass notification. We use a system called School Messenger, so we can message parents that way, or you have students in our district, so you probably receive messages. So we can break down into specific groups, so we can message individual employees or groups of employees. So if there's a lockdown or a weather situation, we can let specific people know, or we can let our families know. So some of the ways that we communicate. We monitor all the Safe to Tell and Raptor. Our Raptor's a little different. Safe to Tell, most of you have probably heard of Safe to Tell. Safe to Tell is an anonymous reporting system, so kids can use that, staff members can use that, parents can use that, and it's anything that somebody needs to report, whether it's criminal or non-criminal, suicide. We get a lot of social emotional calls for service, but we monitor all those and we coordinate nightly with these guys. So these guys have to go out on a lot of safe to tell calls. Raptor is a visitor management system. Every one of our schools has Raptor, so if you go into our school, you have to check in. Raptor does a sex offender check. It checks, it doesn't check felonies, misdemeanors, restraining orders, things like that. All it does is check for sex offenders to make sure that we're not allowing sex offenders into our buildings. So, and then all of our visitors will get a printout. The printout will have their picture, the date and time, and their destination. So when I was the school resource officer at Northglenn High School, and I saw a student with a, it was very common for seniors who had just graduated to come back and want to visit with their friends and visit with teachers and things like that. So they would always say, I have to go to the counselor's office to get a copy of my transcript. Well, then if I found them 3 hours later in the cafeteria, I could talk to those kids and get them out of there if they were creating a dangerous situation. So some of the things that Raptor does for us. After hours security, like I said, we're there 24 hours a day, so we have before and after school programs. Our before school programs start in the morning before school. We have breakfast programs, and then our after school programs for our elementary students go until 6 o'clock. So our buildings, as most of you probably know, our buildings are not just open from 7 a.m. until 3 o'clock p.m. They're open from 6 a.m. until 10 o'clock p.m. with community use and all the different events that we have going on. So we have a lot of different factors. When the shooting happened at the Walmart down in Thornton, that was right around 6 o'clock, so we still had base students at some of our schools. So that was a chaotic situation for us. So again, it wasn't perfect for us, and we learned a lot, and we've done a lot since then, but we were able to communicate with some of those schools and just let them know, hey, just as an awareness, there was a shooting over at the Walmart. You need to go into lockout if you still have students there. It was a little after 6 o'clock, so most of our students should have been out of there, but we did have events going on for beyond just the before and after school. So we're constantly busy there. So. I mentioned just briefly, this is a lot of the work that Angie does for our proactive. The standard response protocol falls in line with the spirit of NIMS and ICS, which is being able to communicate with these guys in fire, speaking the same language. So if fire or police says the incident command post is over here, we're not looking at them saying what in the world is that and where do we go. So the standard response protocol and ICS and NIMS just help us speak the same language with each other. Lockdown and lockout, it still bites us every once in a while. It's just the tricky, and Pat can talk to this, when he was working with John Michael Keyes and Heidi and that group, they did not make the decision to name these protocols lightly. So lockdown and lockout still creates some heartache for us every once in a while. A lot of the districts, including our district, is trying to put a little more information into lockout. So lockout, secure the perimeter, to distinguish between lockdown and lockout. Lockdown is by far the more serious of the situation, and it's also by far it's used much less frequently. So I've done a couple different stints in school districts. After I left the police department, I worked for Adams 12 for 4 years, and then I went to Boulder Valley, and I was the director of security up there. And I don't know if any of you have ties to Boulder Valley. My daughter still goes to school in Boulder Valley. In the fall, we go into lockout almost every day because of bears and mountain lions. So lockout is used almost every single day in the fall in Boulder Valley. So it's kind of crazy. Probably my favorite one, which just happened probably about 6 weeks ago, was they had 2 schools on lockout, one for a moose and one for a bear. So they were in lockout for the same time for a moose and a bear. So anyway, a lot of different reasons that we go into lockout or secure the perimeter. Lockout is going to be used if there's a threat outside the school. Going back to Columbine, at the time of Columbine, There was an expectation that schools had emergency protocols, but it wasn't fresh on our minds. We weren't thinking about, the situations that happened as a result of Columbine. So after Columbine happened, the pendulum swung way far the other way, and so we were super paranoid. So before Columbine, super lax, super complacent. After Columbine, hyper paranoid. So our goal was to find that middle ground. How do we stay aware? How do we know what's going on without being paranoid? To use some terminology from the police department, if you're at a level red, you are amped up. Something is going on. Your adrenaline's going. You're ready for that fight or flight moment. If you're at a level white, you're sitting in your living room, watching football, Christmas, if you have a calm Christmas environment, your guard is down. Neither one of those places are good to be for too long. If you're at red for too long, you're going to give yourself health issues. If you're at white, that is a dangerous place to be because your guard is down. You have to find that middle ground where you are functioning and paying attention to your surroundings but not paranoid. So it's the same way in our school response. So lockout is a protocol that is happening outside of the building. Something's going on. We want to try and keep the education and the learning going as much as possible. So for the most part, we have everybody inside, but it's as business as usual inside. So we're learning. We're not doing anything special other than just paying attention to our surroundings. But again, we're not in that total hyper red moment where locks lights out of sight. Lockdown is that point. Locks lights out of sight. We're getting behind a locked door if we can. If for some reason we have students and people that are in a common area or they can't get behind a locked door, they need to self-evacuate. They have to get out of that area. One of the unfortunate things that we learned at Columbine was a lot of those kids were killed in the library. Had they been given the right to keep themselves safe, some of those kids may have been able to self-evacuate and get out of that area. So what we teach people, you've probably heard of Alice training or run, hide, fight, some of those. Run, hide, fight is probably the one that comes up most frequently in our world, and people ask us, how does that fit into a school environment? Run, hide, fight is a response for anywhere you are. Okay, so if you are in a mall shopping with your family, if you're in a movie theater, if you're in a church, run, hide, fight is essentially, what do? You have to run, you have to get out of that area. If you can't get out of that area, you hide. If you can't hide, you have to fight. This is your life. You have to be able to fight for your life. Why that doesn't necessarily translate into school response is we're dealing with preschoolers, we're dealing with kindergartners, first graders. We don't automatically want to take 25 first graders and run out of the building. If we can get behind a locked door, statistically speaking, we are safer than just evacuating and running and getting out of that area. But what we do teach our staff is once you get behind a locked door, it doesn't just stop there. You have to be thinking about the next step. So the next step is getting behind another locked door if there's a closet that they can get into, getting near an exit where they can self-evacuate if they have to, being prepared for that next step. So we still teach our schools to try and get behind a locked door, but then they have to be thinking about what that next step looks like. So evacuate, self-explanatory. If there's something dangerous inside that building, we want to get out of the building or get out of that area. Shelter in place. Shelter is a blanket term. We used to say tornado, do a tornado response. There aren't a lot of tornadoes in Netherlands, so when I was up in Netherlands, there may be a lot of snow, there may be a lot of wind. Shelter in place is just an umbrella term for staying inside the building and listening for further instructions. We take a lot of direction on shelter in place from fire, from utility companies, so Excel Energy. If there's a gas leak and there's a strong smell of gas outside, we want to try and stay inside as much as we can. We'll turn the HVAC off, do things like that. But then if it gets too hard to breathe inside the building, we may have to evacuate. So a lot of these actions will tie right into each other. So a lot of times we'll be on a lockout. If the threat gets close to coming into the school or does penetrate and get into the school, we'll immediately transition from lockout into a lockdown. Shelter in place and evacuation is the same thing. If it seems too dangerous to go outside, we'll stay inside. If the air gets too saturated with gas or some problem in there, then we may have to evacuate or go out of the building. So absolutely. Yeah.
It just applies to this moment.
Yep.
So I was just wondering if you guys have adjusted the language or the training around fire drills. So we used to do them very specifically where if you're in lockdown, you don't evacuate because of the fire drill, because they could be tricking you to get
Yep.
you out. But with Florida, they pulled the fire alarm first.
Yeah.
And so we're having to rethink
Yeah.
that. Is that something that you guys are doing?
Yeah, absolutely. We teach that if you are in a lockdown, you stay in lockdown unless you see fire or smell smoke, or there's something in that room that is going to force you to leave. But that's exactly right. So just to clarify, the fire alarm was going off as a result of the gunfire and what was going on there. But that's just that example.
Right.
Going back to before Columbine in Arkansas, there was a situation where there were 2 kids and one kid pulled the fire alarm, and then when people were evacuating, the kids started shooting them. So, yeah, we do exactly teach that. So if you are in lockdown and the fire alarm goes off, you are not to evacuate unless you smell smoke or see fire, or if there's some other dangerous situation. And then we also talk about situational awareness. Don't just get into that muscle memory where you kind of go into zombie mode and you just turn the light off and walk out the door. We ask our teachers to pay attention to their surroundings. So if you're going to open the door, take a look and pay attention to what is going on out there. If there are people screaming, if you're hearing loud noises, then you need to get back into your classroom. So it's all about trying to pay attention to what's going on in your surroundings, using your senses. But yeah, we absolutely do talk about that.
Okay.
Yep. We're required by, we still haven't had that super happy marriage with fire yet, law enforcement and, yeah, law enforcement. We're still sort of on the back burner to some of the fire code. And so we still have to do a fire drill every single month by International Fire Code. We have to do our first fire drill within 10 days of school, and then we have to do one every single month after that. We do our lockdown, shelter-in-place, and evacuation drills once per semester. So we'll do, for Adams 12 anyway, we wrote it into our policy that they have certain timelines. So they have to do their lockdown drill within the first 45 days of school. We give them a little more time in the spring because of testing. So we give them a little longer window in the spring just because of everything going on. But we do have it written down that they have to do a lockdown drill, shelter-in-place, and evacuation drill twice a year. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you do only announced lockdowns?
Nope.
Or you do unannounced?
We
as
do
well?
unannounced also. Again, per our policy, we allow them in the fall to do their drills announced. We understand that they have summer brain mush, so we want them to have a successful drill in the fall that they can take their time, they can announce, they can bring people up to speed. But again, per our policy, the spring drill is supposed to be unannounced. Now, there are some, I learned the hard way, unfortunately, when I was when we first implemented this policy, we had some students, some special ed students that it was beyond their capacity for an unannounced drill. And 2 different schools, we had kids that really did not do well, and that was really hard for me. So our goal is to really make it a positive experience for all the kids. We have to test ourselves, we have to learn, but I don't want to give these kids night terrors. And so we wrote it into our policy that if a student is on an IEP, that they can do some coaching. So we will tell either the special ed teacher, or we'll work with the principal to make sure that those students who are going to have problems can be coached ahead of time. We still want to try and have them go through the drill, but we allow them to do some, if they need to do earmuffs or do something to occupy their time, we'll let them know. But by our policy, the fall drill is supposed to be, or can be, announced, and the spring drill is supposed to be unannounced. Yeah.
That's a big deal.
Yeah. The last one I'm going to touch on briefly is hold. What we've learned, again, through the process of continuous improvement, we really have a philosophy, and again, I'm going to give Pat the credit to this, we never settle. Continuous improvement is one of the most important concepts that we take into consideration as we're doing any of our safety and security and emergency planning. And one of the things that we've learned is that the 4 protocols that we've had for all these years that started in 2007, 2008, have not changed other than a little bit around the vocabulary on lockout. But one thing that we did realize was there were situations that weren't quite at the level of a lockdown or quite at the level of a lockout. and we needed to add a protocol, and so hold was officially adopted by our school district this year. And essentially what this is, if we have a student who's having some sort of a medical situation in a hallway and we want to hold the classrooms in that wing, if we had a canine search going on. So we have historically used a non-aggressive canine service called InterQuest. So they're Labradors, they're not aggressive police dogs, but if we were doing a canine search and we didn't want kids coming and interacting, we could hold that hallway. So we added hold to our protocols recently, and again, it's something that the schools have been doing long before we formalized it, but we gave them some formal language to it. So again, if we're working with our SRO, we had an SRO over in Westminster. Westminster and one of the APs tried to pull a student out of class, and he got real aggressive, and he started fighting with the SRO. This was just a couple months ago, and it turns out the kid had 2 knives. And so it could have turned out really bad. If that kid would have been able to get those knives, that SRO potentially could have shot that kid, and it could have been really an ugly situation. So we had administrators holding all the different hallways so that they could deal with that situation. So didn't go into a lockdown, didn't go into a lockout, but fortunately we kind of had this protocol to hold those hallways. So that's our 5th one. Okay. This is a communication that we send out to our parents. Hopefully you've seen this. And this is just sort of an explanation to help parents understand exactly what these protocols are. We try and do our best. The kids do a really good job of understanding these protocols. We've been doing these since 2007 now, so those students who have been in our school district, they know how to do the drills, they know what the processes are. They will help substitute teachers, they will help people who are confused. The kids are our eyes and our ears, and they do a good job of keeping teachers in line. But again, the $1,000,000 question always is, how do we share information with parents without giving away too much information on the internet? We don't want, sometimes it sounds silly, but this has always been a concern for us with Al-Qaeda and ISIS and things like that, them knowing the details of all of our school-specific plans especially. We can't prevent them from knowing lockdown, lockout, shelter-in-place evacuation, but we don't want to broadcast our school-specific plans out there. So we want to teach parents and help educate parents, but we also don't want to give them too much information, so, okay. I got the go faster look here, so sorry. I like the stuff, but I also know that we're on a timeline. So.
I know the council has other
things
to take care of tonight too.
Okay.
Okay. Just trying to be respectful of your time.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah. So just some of the other things that Angie and Jeff work on, working in our emergency operations plans at the schools, making sure maps, just again, being proactive, trying to make sure that that before step is stronger than, as strong as we can make it. This is getting into Jeff's world. So we currently have a school resource officer in every single one of our high schools and all of our middle schools. Elementary schools, we don't have any dedicated SROs, not only in Northglenn, but this is the same model for all of our jurisdictions. We don't have a dedicated SRO in the elementary schools, but typically our middle school and high school SROs will support the elementary schools. Campus security officers, this is one of the things that I was going to touch on with the mill levy. We were able to bring some of our campus security officers back. We do not have armed security other than the police officers in the buildings. So the campus security officers are not armed. They're the eyes and the ears of the school. So all of our high schools have either 4 or 5 campus security officers, and all of our middle schools have either 1 or 2. The district funds 1 in the middle school and 4 at the high schools, but sometimes the schools want more, so they'll either fund 1 additional in the middle school or 1 additional at the high schools.
And the mill specifically, are you going to talk about that we're able to bring an additional campus supervisor on at every high school as well as every middle school as a result of the mill passing, and a half of an FTE at every K-8 as well. So that's a direct impact of the mill passing. So thank you for your support.
Physical security, obviously. we really focus on, so 3 seems to be the magic number in security preparedness. So we have before, during, and after for how we focus on crises. We also look at 3 different pieces of that web of security. So there's physical security, so whether that's door locks or cameras, whatever that looks like, so capital improvements for physical security. The next is human resources. So do we have the appropriate a number of human people helping and supporting kids? So do we have principals, assistant principals, social emotional resources there, mental health resources, campus security officers? And then the last is going to be programmatic and training. So do we have good evidence-based programs for social emotional learning, MTSS? So are we trying to be proactive to help these kids ahead of time? And do we also not only have those programs, but do we practice those programs? So those are kind of the 3 features that we look at. For physical security, here are some of the things that we look at. Secured entries. We've made a shift. 2006 is sort of the time frame that I use. So before 2006, most people could just walk into any school and it was the honor system. We didn't have locked doors. We didn't have anything directing people to different locations. It was you open the door and hopefully you were a good person and you would go check in and self-check. After 2006, we started doing a better job of directing people at least into our offices. So that was kind of the era of directed entrances. We did a better job of creating a barrier between the public and our students, but it was not the best, and we still have staff members. Where we're going these days is a secure vestibule. Secure vestibule, you don't have face-to-face contact with a person until you've checked in. So it's a much safer process for our office staff. They're having a barrier. They'll have a window that they can check in. They'll have a teller window that they can slide papers. Most of our, depending on space, most of our vestibules have a drop, so parents can drop a backpack or a lunch or something like that. So for one, we don't have to let every single person fully into the school, and 2, it's a much safer environment. So that glass is either bulletproof or bullet resistant. So one of the things that happened at Sandy Hook was that person was able to shoot through the glass and just walk through and enter the school. These vestibules are bullet resistant or bulletproof, so the person isn't going to be able to cut that, get through that window by the time our law enforcement partners are able to get in there. So some of the features that we're doing. All right, Pat, am I doing okay still?
You're good, sir.
Okay, thank you. So this is the end of the actual presentation. One of the things that I was asked to discuss was how are we in Northglenn or in Adams 12 able to look at school safety and security different as a result of the bond that passed 2 years ago now, and the mill levy that was just passed. So I'll echo what Pat said. Thank you very much. We couldn't do it without our community members. So I don't think I need to tell this group, but I will just briefly. The difference between a bond and a mill, a bond is for capital improvements. So we can't hire more staff members with our bond, but some of the things that we are doing, the secure vestibules like I was talking about. If any of you have been to Westview Elementary School in the last couple months, they have their secure vestibule in now. They like it. The feedback that I've received from them is that they just really appreciate it. They feel safer and they can conduct that business. So secure vestibules, camera upgrades. We're still using old analog cameras that you can tell there's a blob going by, but you're never going to be able to, half the time determine if it's a male walking by or a female walking by or an adult. The camera analytics these days, I can put into our camera system now that I'm looking for a green backpack from January 1st through November 2nd, and it will scrub all of that data that we have, and it will go only to where there's a green backpack. So much clearer pictures. We can actually solve situations with some of our cameras these days. So upgrades to our camera systems have been another key. Adding some of our camera systems and adding access control. I'm a big fan of access control, so the card readers instead of brass keys. Historically, we've given out brass keys to get into our building as well as getting into classrooms. if somebody loses one of those exterior keys, well, you're vulnerable. You either rekey the whole outside of the building, or you just hope that the person didn't have it attached to their school-specific lanyard. So access control gives us a lot more depth. So we can assign certain times that key is good. Problems that school districts constantly face is people propping doors open so that they can get back in. Some of that is because of human nature and being a little lazy. Some of that is because it makes sense to be able to get back into the building if there is something going on. With access control, we can put a lot more card readers around doors so that people can quickly get in. Playground paras can give hall passes to kids so kids can go in and use the bathroom. They don't have to prop doors. So those are some of the things that we've done with the bond money. For the mill levy money, most of that has done with bringing staff back. In the 2010 to 2012 time, when the recession hit, we were just crushed with having to get rid of a lot of really crucial positions. So all of our elementary schools before the recession had a principal and an assistant principal. Most of those elementary schools, short of the title schools, had to get rid of their assistant principals. Most of our elementary schools did not have assistant principals, so we were able to bring back assistant principals as a result of the mill levy money. Pat already mentioned the campus security officers. Before the recession happened, we had 5 at the high school, 1 at the middle school. All of the middle schools lost their campus security officer, and 2 of the campus security officers at the high schools were removed. So those were the positions that were removed that were able to bring back those eyes and ears of the school. A lot of counselors, a lot of mental health workers. Again, anybody on my team that I've introduced here, we would love for all this to happen at that social emotional level, so we can get resources for kids and have them help them talk through some of the trauma that they're going through. So a lot more counselors back in the schools. So that's where a lot of that mill levy money has gone. So that is it. That was fast and furious, and I hope I didn't go too fast, but I know that you want to talk about some other things, and I know that, yeah.
I don't know, does anyone else have a question? I have a lot. I know, I'm sorry. Well, this has been a thing for me. We had a visit, I think it was the State of the District presentation by the superintendent, but it happened to be not long after the Florida shooting. And so I had some questions on behalf of the community just about how are we keeping our schools safe, because people really needed some, I don't know. Reassurance, thank you. He used the phrase, "we cannot secure our high schools." And that kind of freaked me out a little bit. So that was the purpose of having you guys come out, because that's a big deal. I'm like, that's a question for me, and then I can get kind of feisty as a mom, and so I thought, well, let's see. And I walked right in the back door of my daughter's high school, and nobody said a word. And it was a very busy cafeteria filled with kids, but the back door was wide open. And I don't believe that you can't secure the high schools, and so I was kind of hoping you could share direction that you're moving.
Absolutely.
To do that.
First of all, I just blabbed for 42 minutes and didn't know that I was supposed to be talking about that. So
That's okay.
So one thing I would definitely want to point out is that in the mill plan, there's a specific line item for securing high schools, and Chris will talk about the operational component of that, but that's $300,000 a year dedicated to securing our high schools. And Chris can talk a little bit more about how we're going about that.
So just
So
real
that
quickly.
was new money that we did not have until
That's
the mill
fantastic.
passed.
In connection to was the Claire Davis Act. And I think you went really fast through that. And that was my concern.
Yeah, you bet.
Is how those two fit together.
Okay, so let's go back to, I'm going to go back to Sandy Hook. Actually, so Sandy Hook, after Sandy Hook happened, is when this school district, I wasn't here, I was in Boulder, but that's when this school district added A phones to all their elementary, middle, and K-8 campuses. So the A phone is the buzz-in. If you don't know what it is, you walk up. So all of our elementary, middle, and K-8 schools are on permanent lock out. So the front door, you should not be able to open that front door and gain access. So the A phone is the buzz-in, so you have to be buzzed in. Okay, $1 million question that you just brought up is how do we handle high schools? Legacy High School is trending towards 2,500 students. So we almost have 2,500 students. We can't physically have all those kids in there, feed all those kids and get them into classrooms. So we have to have different cycles. That's why kids have to come and go. We have to have some kids with first period all the way through 8th period. Some of those kids have to go off campus for lunch. We can't feed that many kids. So that's the $1,000,000 question, is how do you secure those high schools? What I did in Boulder Valley and what Pat was just talking about is we locked down all of our high schools, and we made the kids have card access to let themselves in. So again, the benefit of access control is you can set the parameters. So if you have a high school athlete, that athlete may have before school access, during school access, and after school access, versus a student who doesn't do any extracurricular. You can have that student have access from half an hour before school starts until the time the bell rings in the afternoon. So that is what I proposed with this district. That's what we're marching towards. What Pat mentioned was the $300,000 will go just for that infrastructure to add the necessary card readers and the cards for our students. Let me take a step back a little bit. What Chris may or may not have talked about, Superintendent Godowski, was we convened a task force after the shootings happened. And it was a task force that was comprised of school-specific personnel, district personnel, parents, law enforcement, and students. And so we wanted the voice of, the typical reaction after something like that happens is to just go straight to the physical. So, increasing your fences, increasing the vestibules, whatever that looks like, more cameras. A lot of that is really geared towards that physical. And we wanted to hear from students what made them, or what would make them feel safer. And so we're still, we had our 3 meetings. And as a matter of fact, I actually have to talk, we have a summary of the work that we did that I'm presenting to our senior staff tomorrow, and then we'll go to those next steps. But from the physical component, that was what I was pushing for, was having the students have fobs so that they would have to let themselves in. It's not foolproof. We still need that human element, that human capital, to be monitoring that door that you were talking about, to make sure that we don't have tailgaters that come in. It's thank goodness we're not at that point. Like the schools in Israel for a long time have, armed guards and jersey barriers and fences and barbed wire. And we're not at that point yet, and I hope that we don't get to that point. Our goal is still to try and create a warm environment, while also just paying attention to how we get people in and out of our schools. So I don't have a good black and white answer for you, but we have a plan, and we're trying to move that forward.
I love that you're listening to the student voice, because they know the loopholes.
Exactly.
They know how to get in. They ask the right questions.
Yeah.
And they're pretty afraid.
Yeah. Exactly.
She also wanted to clear Davis.
Oh, Claire Davis, yeah. I'm sorry.
We'll just have those connect. I was just worried because, we talk about it in the sense of a prop door.
Yeah.
Claire Davis Act. But, if we have an unsecured entry and we know it's unsecured,
Yeah.
then that opens that. I was
Absolutely.
worried, so I don't know.
Yeah.
So I just learned over the weekend that the state is just about ready. I think the Attorney General's office is just about to publish the standards of reasonable care. And so Claire Davis Act was based on you have to provide a standard of reasonable care, and that is yet to be defined. But I did learn at a board meeting this weekend that I volunteer at that those standards should be published, we think, early 2019.
That helps too. I'm confident
that Adams 12 will exceed in all of those standards of care. I think we're on the leading edge of most of that work.
Well, then that makes it legal. I guess it's still a worry when you have a kindergartner who's safe in a small building that's secure, and then a middle schooler who's reasonably safe in middle school, and then high school's just really scary.
Well, as you know, may or may not know, I guess, Northglenn High School has more than 60 exterior doors, so it's a huge challenge. You know, that's the argument that people jump to metal detectors, and I have to explain to them what it would look like to actually maintain and operate a metal detector. As I already mentioned, you have school that starts at 6 a.m. and goes until 10 o'clock p.m. So you have to have somebody, you have to have at least 2 people manning a metal detector from 6 a.m. until 10 o'clock p.m. One person to actually scan the metal detector and the other person to watch to make sure that they're not about to get killed. So you have to have multiple shifts of that. And in a school district with 60 plus doors, it would be very easy for this student to be scanned in and then go open this door. So you technically have to have 60 plus people watching every single one of those school doors. So it's just a challenge that isn't realistic.
There's no perfect way to do it.
Yeah.
We cannot secure high schools. Put me off a little
Yeah,
bit.
for sure.
Because I know other districts are securing high schools. So I'm so excited that you have a plan.
We're trying.
I think it's awesome.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate you coming and explaining that, because it's information I understand, but I don't think it's common knowledge for everyone. So
Yeah.
I thought that was great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? I would like to thank you because it's unfortunate that we need this type of a robust plan that you guys have come up with, but I appreciate that you have, and it sounds like Adams 12 is really doing a great job, so we appreciate what you're doing for our kids, so thank you. Thank you.
We're always scared and we're not perfect, but we're certainly trying. And again, Pat has instilled in all of us the thought of continuous improvement, so we're never going to settle, that's for sure. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
I still don't understanding why we don't have tomato drills. Like, remember when I would have to go and like,
He's done.
Thank
you.
He got off the hook. He let him off the hook.
I had to go charter school, we didn't have windows to let us.
Thank you.
Okay.
No.
Our next item tonight is the City Council Employees Performance Evaluation Process Update. Mouthful. And we have Joe Matu with us again tonight. Hello again. Nice to see you.
Thank you for letting me come back.
Did you think we wouldn't?
Well, you never know, right? Sometimes I wear out my welcome quickly. Although I'm not nearly as an interesting topic as the last one.
Just give me a minute
Yep.
and I'll try to go through the class with you.
You hired her for her AV skills, correct?
You did.
Oh yeah, well they forgot.
No, it's the same thing. I just call it shelter because
Like maybe it's been too long for me. That's when you start realizing.
Ready to go whenever? Okay. Wasn't sure if we had everybody we needed, so. Great. Okay, well, thank you again for time here. Let's see here. Oops. So last week, you were all very kind to share a lot of different thoughts with me. So I did my best to kind of distill that down to what I took as sort of the real 30,000 foot level takeaways. There were lots of very specific things that you had feedback on, and I certainly still have those notes and will be using those. But I just wanted to review with you what I heard to make sure that I took away an accurate read on it. So what I heard from council was that at the high level, what you're looking for is a tool and an evaluation process that provides a collaborative, professional, and respectful process, facilitates your staff's growth and development, creates actual mechanisms for you to support staff's development and provide feedback on expectations, the desire to bring a goal focus into the tool and to do that in the context of the work plan, to be able to give quality feedback from from lots of parties. Quality feedback from you, from your actual appointees and a way to bring in quality feedback from your stakeholders. That you want a system that is conversational. You also want one that's kind of an ongoing process, not versus like a once a year kind of, oh, it's an event, we have to do it that way. And that you're looking for a clear system and a system that's both manageable and you can replicate it year from year instead of having to do something different each time. So just want to check in first of all to see if I interpreted correctly, or if there's anything you would like me to add to that list.
I can't think of anything to add.
Okay, great. So tonight, as I take you through all the specific topics, I was thinking we could kind of use this as our criteria to check back with, to say, you know, from where you land on all of these topics, are we heading down this direction? Because sometimes it can get exciting to go over here, but if this is really the bottom line goal, then that's what we'll work from. So, great. Okay. So the topics that we're going to go through, unfortunately for you, maybe good and bad. The good news is we're going to do them in one evening and we're going to do them quickly. So the bad side is you only have a few minutes to talk about them. When I work with employee groups to develop this, we literally take on each one of these topics per session. So that's why this is going to be a quick thing, but also why we have created a system that allows you an opportunity to look over a draft before we move into an actual finalization on it. So as you saw from my report to you, what the experts say about the ideas of goal setting, and here are these items here. It should align with your organization's strategic goals, can really be a tool to track the organization's performance, not just the person's performance, gives an opportunity to connect the employee's value directly to the work of the organization and the outcomes. And then the thought is either the goals should cascade down, they should reflect from the higher level goals that you have created as an organization, or they can link up. Can do that piece and that up there. Pretty similar in that, and that they should certainly change yearly as the goals of the organization and as the role of the position changes. So before I move into specific questions on goal setting from you, any questions from what the experts have to say about this? Okay, great. So what role do you want to see your appointees play in the goal setting process? I can give you some models and then maybe that'll help. So sometimes what will happen is the council will just ask the appointees to give their goals and then council adds any additional ideas that they have. Sometimes the goals come from council and the appointee gets to add. Sometimes it's actually they're developed together in kind of a sit-down meeting. Sometimes it's simply, well, you know what our community goals are, so tell us how your role fits within that. So those are all sorts of different models.
I was just looking at that where it says practices by other municipalities.
Yeah.
I guess one thing I would hope is that the tool helps drive the goal, because the employee can have a goal that's not related, and so that's not helpful. Right. So there could be a lack of self-awareness, right? And so the person's like, oh, I'm really going to work on this because I'm so excited and I have a passion, where performance-wise they need to work on this.
Right, exactly.
So if the tool could match in some way or help guide the goal setting,
okay,
I think that makes sense.
And do you have a sense of how a tool could drive the goal setting?
Well, I think it has something to do with the expectations of the role.
Okay.
Right? So if you have an expectation to do this well, and you're on a linear scale, you're at a 3 instead of a 5, then there's growth needed in that particular area. Does that make sense?
It does. And so let me play for you. So what some organizations do, and we'll come down to this later when we talk about what you'll actually be rating your person on, then the goals all have to fit under one of those categories so that you can make a link with the things that you are ultimately rating the person on, and that way there's some clarity on that. The only challenge with that, it's not a problem, that's actually a great way to do it, is sometimes then you get so many goals, because if you have an expectation that there's a goal in each one of those areas, it can become way too much to do with for the organization. The other challenge is sometimes the community or the organization has goals that aren't well reflected by those categories. And so the challenge then is, okay, well that's great for the performance evaluation, but Madam Manager, what we really need you to be working on is X, Y, or Z. So we could aim for some kind of hybrid that brings some into the performance evaluation categories, but knowing that there might be some room for some additional things that are important to council at the time. Did that make sense?
It does make sense. I'm just wondering if then there's something wrong with the performance tool if it's not capturing the job. Like, I wouldn't want to send someone off with a task that's not in their job description.
Yes, and job descriptions and evaluations are different, right? So they may have many, many things that are in there, and I certainly, my experience of city managers is they do a whole lot of stuff, and you can't capture all of that stuff, at least at a very minute level, in a performance evaluation. You'd be writing probably War and Peace twice over, so there's going to be some level of generality in a performance evaluation.
Isn't that the purpose though? Like, I don't want to evaluate someone on generic things that don't match their job description.
Right.
I would want there to be a connection between.
So let me try to come up with a specific example. Okay. So a typical thing that I would expect a city manager to be evaluated on would be organizational leadership. Okay? Great. So you may have all sorts of things that describe what your expectations are about organizational leadership in an evaluation, but you're still probably using some fairly general type of language. So you may have, that may be an important piece of it, but for this next year, you may have her working on it. I'm making this up, so this could be a bad one on the fly. But you could have her working on some IGA that goes off into some interesting thing that doesn't fall under organizational leadership, it doesn't fall under budgeting, doesn't necessarily fall under community. Do you see what I'm saying? You could have some one-off things, high priority for council, but your tool's probably not going to cover every single piece of it.
So here's two worries.
Okay.
One is that we develop a tool that doesn't capture the essence of the job, and so we could have someone score really high on a tool and not do their job very well. Or we could have a tool that says this is what you're evaluated on.
It doesn't reflect.
That, well, no, or but we have all these other goals that are taking them off their true purpose.
Got it.
And so...
Yeah, okay. That's fair.
I don't...
All right. What are other thoughts on this topic?
Yeah.
Anyone else on writing?
I think I'm just really struggling with how do you evaluate a role like a city manager when it's so huge and it's so vast and it's so dynamic. And I mean, I will say, just 1 year in council, something's come up and we want it done now, and and then somebody, you know, so like it changes, it could pivot quickly as well.
Sure. Yeah.
So, you know, we could have someone set goals today, and then 2 months something bad happens, or something, you know, we want traffic calming done this year or something. I mean, that seems kind of common for us. You know, it needs to be kind of flexible in that too. So I think that's what I'm trying to have a hard time of trying to figure out how to evaluate somebody on large, vast, I don't know, overall topics. Like for me as an employee, like I have goals set out of things that I need to do. And I mean, it's easy because I have a very small window, but with somebody with that much to kind of cover, and I haven't really ever come across that in my professional experience before, so I'm having a really hard time trying to like figure out how to be fair about that. I do think that the evaluation should align with the organization's strategic goals. I think that's really important that, you know, goal setting is a partnership. You know, there's definitely things that we see as priorities for our community that, you know, obviously need to be addressed. And then obviously I'd like to see that appointee, whoever they be, you know, come with something to the table as well.
Yeah.
Obviously they see it from a different perspective than we do, being an employee versus, you know, goals we hear from our constituents. Go ahead,
Julie, I'm struggling because I do have a system that I use every single day. And like when you say the city manager's job is big, it is. A teacher's job is out of control. And so the teacher evaluation system, whether it be in Jeffco or Adams 12 or Denver's, is a monster. I'm not advocating for that because that's not even reasonable. It has those pieces, and so I think there's personal goal setting where I say this is what I want to focus on and this is what I want to achieve this year, and then there's goal setting based on my performance, and I think those are two different things. We can put them together, but if someone evaluates me and says, you know, organizational leadership or responsiveness to crisis is something that's lacking based on evidence, and we want our people to grow, we would set a goal around an area that needs some work.
I think for that then what I'm curious about is what would be the measurement factor? So like responsiveness to an emergency or something. What do you measure? What is the variable that you're looking at?
You have to have a tool that says,
okay,
this is what amazing responsiveness is, this is what crappy responsiveness is, this is what the middle looks like. And so if you don't have that component, then any scale is just an arbitrary subjective number. So if I give, you know, not to pick on you, but you're sitting here, if I give Heather a 5 and Jordan gives her a 2, but we don't have a scale, then the numbers don't mean anything.
I feel like that's what's lacking the most out of our current process is there is no scale. Like I mean, when we were filling out the one for Joanna, I'm like, hey, here's a good number.
Right.
Yeah, it's like,
and what a 2
really
means to you may vary from what a 2 means from someone
exactly.
else. Yeah.
And so
we'll get into that with the rating piece of it. All right, so here's what I'm interpreting from that. Anything else that others wanted to add to the goal setting piece? So I'll bring it back. You know, the nice piece is you're going to get to actually see an actual tool, and we'll tweak it as we need to meet it. So I'm interpreting that you do want the appointees to bring goals into it. We want some separation on performance goals versus personal like development types of goals. We want some flexibility because things change. So a year may be too long of a time frame for all of our goals on that, and the need to find a way to connect it to the strategic aspects of the work you're doing. Any other thoughts on that? All right. Great. Yes.
At what point are we going to talk about the timeline for moving an employer and appointee through this process? Because I think about I think back to when I was first sworn into council, all of the employee evaluations were already done. Yeah. And so the next, which means that in this scenario, the goals would already be established. Yeah. And I think that that's really tough on the incoming council people and probably also on the appointees because a new council member may have very different expectations based on their experience, and that may not necessarily translate fairly to the appointee in an evaluation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, if I have different goals than perhaps this person is operating under.
So, you're right. This is always the big challenge for councils is it fair to put the new person in the place of trying to also evaluate the appointees? So there's pluses and minuses to both of those. And we're actually going to have a whole slide on that topic. So if I don't capture it, help me remember, but I will try to remember on that. All right. Self-evaluation. So I heard very distinctly that you did want feedback from your appointees about their view of their performance on that. So there was information from the memo that talked about some version of experts saying don't use them. So I just took that information out. We're going to work under the assumption that we're going to go that direction on that way. All the good parts here really does allow for two-way communication, can be motivating for employees, especially in your scenario. I like self-evaluations for the very point that you pointed out, that you don't spend your whole day with your appointees, so you don't necessarily have a constant look into what they're doing. So this gives them an opportunity to also help educate you about the kinds of work they're doing, allows them some control of their career. The recommendation from the experts is that the self-evaluation is sort of the start of the evaluation process, that it's kind of the first piece that occurs in there. And then they recommend that it's not scored on the same form as evaluation. My recommendation to you with this level of appointees is you don't even score self-evaluations. All that ends up being is a tool for people to end up sort of inflating if they think they're going to have some kind of a result because of the numbers. So I'm not a big fan of actually putting numbers on there on that. So from your standpoint, what's the data in a self-evaluation that would be helpful for you? And again, I'll point out some of the models. Some, they basically have the appointee in the same areas that you're going to be rating on, the same topics. They just put their comments. Some of the municipalities I work with, they're more general. City manager, city clerk, just write us up a memo telling us about your accomplishments for the year. It's not necessarily tied to the specific areas that you have. And then we can be creative if there's other data that would be helpful to you. So one of those models or something else that you would like?
Well, just from experience, I've seen them always come forward to us with, not you, you haven't come forward yet, but the city manager and the other employees have come forward to us with their goals, and they tell us about what they've accomplished and what they're looking forward to accomplishing in the future. So I kind of like that, and it just seems like something they've done themselves. We've never told them that they have to supply a self-evaluation. They always come in with that. So.
So certainly with goals, having them respond specifically to the accomplishments related to the goals makes sense. What other information would be helpful to you from your appointees? Yeah?
I think I said this at our last meeting, but I want to know what areas they feel like we can help them improve upon, but also like what do they have the tools that they need in their job to get the job done? And if not, what are they missing? What can we be doing as council from their perspective that can make their job environment better?
So what tools and resources they need from you?
Right, and I mean, I think obviously what did you really excel at this year, I think is helpful. But I think also giving them a chance to, like, hopefully in a safe space to also tell us, like, what they need.
Okay, nice. Other thoughts?
I think it should just be, I like self-evaluations because I learn more about myself throughout the whole process. So whatever gives them the opportunity to do that, to not only address achievements, but failures. What didn't go so well? What did I change? And then also, what are the things I'm still lacking? Or just a general idea of like, this is where, I'd like to see myself, next year or something. And I'd like to see the city or something in this direction. So I think it's really important for our appointees not to just do a self-reflection of themselves, but also a self-reflection of their department or like their responsibilities. So like, for example, Joanna would say, the city clerk's office this is where we're heading. Versus just is where I am, I'm gonna get this new certificate or something. Something that's broader.
Great.
I think it's super important for them to really understand the tool themselves ahead of time.
Mhm.
So, like, something I do personally is if I know these are the things that I'm evaluated on, I can build my own body of evidence throughout the year. Like, oh yeah, I did something related to this, I'm gonna put it in this file.
Right.
And that way, it's not a one-shot self-reflection, but a all the way through the year, this is how I'm working on these components.
So, yeah, that makes sense to me. Right. Love those situations where people get thrown in evaluation and they didn't know they were going to be graded on that. Oh, that was, sorry. I don't charge extra for the sarcasm. Okay. All right, anything else you want to think about on self-evaluation? Oh, and in the process, do you want to get that at the start of the, before you do your evaluation? Some, once in a while I've seen an organization, not with a council appointee, but I've seen with employees where they kind of do the evaluation and then at the meeting they compare notes at that point in time. So that would be the other method on that. I think that makes sense. You all would rather reflect on what they write?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the way I always kind of split them more, but I mean, I could see how it would sway you though.
Yeah, but
You're like, wow, you're really great. You
Yeah.
know, I think you wrote so well about yourself, and I just think you're awesome too. So,
well, it sets up more conflict, which I think is that alternative view on this table.
yeah.
If you wait and you say, this is how I think you are, and this is how you think you are, and they don't match, I think that's why people avoid it.
Yeah.
But the information's still valuable.
All right, so we'll plan on you guys getting that ahead of time so that you can at least think about it as context of what you're going to say too. All right. This is, I was looking over the current system that you have, and it's interesting because yours is sort of a combination of a couple of different things. You talk in your current system, some of it is the actual what the people do, you know, whether it comes down to things like budget or in Corey's situation, you know, giving legal advice, those types of things. So sometimes you see evaluations that that's really what it is. It's the actual duties the person has and then how well they do on it. Another school of thought is more this core competency on the soft skills. I call that more the how of you do it. You know, the quality of the kinds of communication, the qualities of leadership, the achievement of goals, the more the how you get the work done. Your current system, when I looked at them, is kind of a combination. There's a little bit of how and a little bit of what in your current tools on that. So some organizations with really high-level executives, and of course my experts don't necessarily specific to the public sector, but for all sectors, some look really just at metrics that you already have in the organization, and at least with your chief executive officer, that's what they're evaluated on, is do it. More challenging in the public sector, so probably makes sense for you to have a tool that's maybe not exactly what you have in your current, but that gets down more to the specifics of either what or how or a combination of what you're doing. So, thoughts on that? That may have been too high level of an overview to make myself clear, so please let me know if you have questions.
I think because we're not with them all the time, I personally need the performance metrics. I can't say what they do 24/7 and how they do 24/7. I also think it's kind of above my pay scale to be evaluating these people sometimes, but I would rather use a performance metric for sure. And to that end, where I say that I don't really like to evaluate these people, what do these cities do that don't have an evaluation? Like, how does that?
They negotiate salary with their manager each year, and that's it. They give no feedback to their manager other than they would do in a regular thing. It's not my preferred system for that.
Right.
Yeah.
That is so strange. So they could just fire on a whim? I mean,
Well, they usually have to have some kind of discussions around that, but what they just don't do is have a really ongoing conversation about, they have ongoing conversation about this task and this project,
Right.
but what they don't say is, here's what we need from you, what do you need from us? They don't really have those developmental discussions with their folks, so.
We don't want that.
Yeah, it's not my recommendation for you from that standpoint, yeah.
Lots of thoughts, but I feel like I'm talking too much.
Keep talking.
No, you're doing
No one's
great.
weighing in, so
I
please
just
do.
do it so much that I don't know.
You breathe this stuff, so of course you're.
It's every day, all day, especially in December. The soft skills, as they were, on the right-hand side of our memo,
Yes.
it says use of position-specific standards or competencies.
Yep.
And I think that's something that we need to do,
Yeah.
is to have them be
Yes, unique for the roles.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
strengths and weaknesses. I think that's
Too general.
Yeah, and it's not helpful for growth-reducing feedback, really.
And that
if
organization is changing away from that, I'm happy
Okay,
to say.
like
so.
that's not the best.
Yeah.
And when you say performance metric,
Performance metrics is if the organization already has strong metrics that they're tracking. So some of the municipalities have gone to things like zero-based budgeting or performance-based budgeting, and some of those. So they're already tracking organizational metrics and outcomes, and they're basically grading their chief executive officer on the organization's ability to meet its high-level metrics. So I'm not aware that Northglenn's at that point yet that you have those kinds of metrics already established. So that'd be a challenge for us to go to a pure metrics-based thing. We're probably looking here at either the kind of system that you have now, which is a combination. We have some things that are very job-specific, right? Different ones for clerk and for manager and attorney. But they are that combination of the specific work they do, the duties, and then some version of things like communication and goal achievement and some of those, again, softer skills, which you're probably familiar with.
well, I think those are the ones I tend to go towards. So I'm just trying to relate this.
Yep.
When we say performance metrics, that would be like rating a teacher on test scores.
Right, correct.
And that's really hard to do as an isolated thing.
Yeah, especially if you don't have those metrics in place already for how the business is running.
Yeah, if it's paired with something else, I think that makes sense. But that's one of those summative assessments that I can't fix after the fact. So if I don't know along the way that you need me to change or shift my work, then it's a gotcha.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Well, because when I think of performance metrics, like one of the ones that I think we could use eventually would be, response time to like the CRM, like inputs or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because how does the organization as a whole respond to those types of queries?
Yep.
Would be like a performance metric I think we could adopt.
Yeah, again, I think the best systems that I see organizations already have developed some strong metrics, but what we can do is also give you a tool where in years, if you come to that kind of more metric-based approach to some of the other business, that those could then be blended easily into the system without you having to create a whole new evaluation system. Since they're not necessarily in place. And most of the municipalities, they're still in the baby steps of developing these kinds of organizational metrics, so you guys are not out of line from that standpoint, in my experience. But so what I'm interpreting, tell me if I'm wrong, is that some combination of the what they do, job specific, and this how they do it. So the quality of these types of softer skills you're getting, probably at least for our first draft, to take a look at that. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think so.
Please.
Just a point of discussion.
Yeah,
I wanna
please.
Go back to something Jenny said.
And I could be off base. I'm just wondering if we have clear job descriptions and clear performance evaluations that have the expectation around those soft skills, so like the communication and the responsiveness and anything like that, would it matter that a new council rolled in and had specific things? So like if I rolled in brand new and said, oh, now that I'm here, I want you to do X, Y, and Z, Heather could come back and go, welcome, but this is what I do and this is how I'm evaluated. And any request you have needs to fit under here. Does that make sense? Or am I thinking about it wrong?
No, I think you're thinking about it in the right way. Yeah, I think that helps.
So what I'm interpreting, and correct me, is you need a system that is clear enough that those, like your example you just gave, is that ongoing picture that this person needs to do it. But I think what I heard is the concern is actually is more around the goals, where that's the piece where a new council could come in and say, wait a minute, I agree that you need to have strong staff leadership. I agree that you need to have ethical budgeting, you know, blah, blah, blah. But, oh, by the way, I don't want you to be working on I-25 project. Now I want you working over here, which is probably going to fall more under those annual work plan type of goal types of things.
Which part of the reason that's coming up is, as you remember, we were sworn in November, and then we didn't have any sort of retreat or goal-setting session until February.
Yeah.
And at that point, our appointees' goals would have already been established for the next year. And so what I want to get right is the timing of when we're doing evaluations, so that, and I don't know exactly how we do that, because there may always be a gap between council being sworn in and the timing of an evaluation. But what I don't want to happen is for an appointee to be held to two different sets of goals.
Can I just in my head, so let me see if this makes sense. So it seems like a similar situation if I'm a third grade teacher and I have a principal and then I get a new principal. My job description didn't change, my evaluation system didn't change, how I demonstrate my skills as a teacher don't change. But if Principal A said, we're focusing on math, but Principal B says, no, we're focusing on writing. As a teacher, I just have to shift, but all of my work stays the same. And so my professional goal is going to be related to, I need to improve my classroom management. At the same time, I'm spinning the plate of this new focus on writing because I have a new leader. Does that make, I mean, I'm just trying to put what you're saying into my world so
Right.
that, because I feel like the work is going to maintain no matter what the goal is. And so I think that's where we go back to that goal setting where there's two layers maybe. If we want a growth producing performance goal, that's one thing. And if we want to have an organizational like focus goal, that's a separate thing.
Joe?
Yeah.
We can play an example forward with me.
Okay.
So per my contract, I'm scheduled to do a 6-month evaluation with mayor and council, and then an annual evaluation. So my annual evaluation should take place prior to late August of next year. So leading up to that point, we go through the process, and then potentially we may have shift on council in November with the election. So I think a piece of it is with me as manager onboarding new council members is being very transparent and sharing that information about what the performance goals are specific to my evaluation and how they relate to the work plan. Because you will have that cycle. We wouldn't want to move up the annual work session unless you said, no, we do, Heather, into, say, November, well, December or January. We'd probably stick on that, be consistent with a February or March annual work session for workflow purposes. So nothing's really going to shift too significantly unless council says this is now your focus, and I'm going to be part of that discussion. It's likely that I would be bringing something forward to you and saying we need to put this on hold, and I really need to invest my resources over here, and this is going to be my focus for the next couple of months or year. But that would be a two-way communication, ongoing communication approach that I think works pretty seamlessly as long as that communication is there. Does that help?
Yeah, and my additional thought, in addition to that, is you already said to me last week that you don't want this just to be an annual event. You want to be at least to have an ongoing conversation. And the best organizations, the goals get discussed like at least quarterly to say, are these still the right goals? You know, if this, I will use an example that wouldn't happen here, right? You know, if town was like poor California that got hit with a wildfire and all at once you were in a relief sort of situation, of course her goals are going to change for the year. So you're going to have that discussion and say, wow, like you said, still doing her job based on all those other categories, but we have the flexibility and the nimbleness to change performance goals, either as it's a new council or new events occur in the community.
I think maybe where I'm getting confused is the term performance goal versus like just goal.
Yeah, let me do terms, my version of them, and you can add to this. Typically what we think of performance goals those are goals that really are related to the work they're doing currently. So your goals and what you have for them. And then personal goals are more typically developmental. So, you know, let's see if I could even make up an example right now. Maybe she wants to get some kind of certification that's going to bring some value to the organization over time. That's more of a personal development type of goal. So it's that longer term kind of next step career goal type of piece with that.
So I think there's a third type of goal, and I think maybe that's where I'm getting confused.
Yeah, okay, let's get our words right.
Are we going to do any, and this is where I thought people were pushing from last week, is having goals related to the evaluation system that help grow the staff. So that kind of growth producing, maybe it's more feedback than goals, but it's usually developed together.
Sure,
so
developmental, kind of personal.
If communication is an issue as a broader sense, and that's marked lower on the evaluation, and then that becomes a goal.
So you're talking more about like organizational goals that you want her to manage? Is that what you're talking about, or is it still a goal for her?
It's a terminology thing that's getting me, because to me that's a performance goal because it's based on my performance rubric. So if my performance is I got a 2 in communication, but I got a 4 in organization, I don't need a goal around organization. I need a goal around communication.
Right.
So then the people providing the evaluation would say, you're awesome at this, and this is something that we need you to have as a focus area, and here's some feedback that will help you grow, and this needs to be a performance goal. But maybe that's...
Oh, yes. Okay, so I see what you're saying. You're thinking of performance as you need to improve performance versus I'm thinking of performance as related to the specific work and expectations that you have. Okay, you're right. It's I think it's a language difference, but I know what you mean.
I thought we wanted the evaluation-based goal. I don't know what you would call it, but if nobody else wants that, then I'm just talking. But if we say,
help me understand what an evaluation goal is versus a
that's
goal
what I
around
was
her work.
talking about.
Okay.
So, well, like your example, it's not about the fire versus the budget. It's about communication is the skill that needs to be improved.
Okay.
And so that's where the goal is.
So like work plan goals versus, okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Or
let me
am I
come
just
up, I
talking?
think I know what you're saying. I'm struggling with language. Rather than getting us confused with language, let me come back with those.
We just said 5 different goals, right?
I know.
And I'm a
Goals,
little.
personal goals,
I don't know what
organizational goals,
goals are.
performance goals.
I think I have a
evaluation
picture of
goals.
it.
I don't have the right words for it. I don't want to get tripped up with language, so if it doesn't get captured in our
what kind of
drift.
goals do you want to set?
Heather at this point's going, I want nothing at this point. She's like, why did I bring up this topic?
What kind of goals make sense to you?
You know what, let's do this. Let me come back with, again, it works so much better when we come back with a sample, and then we can
That would
tweak
be
from
helpful.
there. Yeah, and that's ultimately our goal here. Do I get a
Look at
point for
her,
the joke?
yes. Little
All
puppy.
right,
I love it.
nicely said. Okay.
So, I was sitting here listening to all this. You guys just confuse me totally. I mean, you know, that's the way it is. But our employees basically look at the goals that the council sets. They live and breathe our retreat and our goals. And then I think we should be evaluating them on their performances that they're working towards our goals. And the rest of this stuff is kind of like wordsmithing, is basically what it is. But our employees, I mean, you know, the city manager knows, you know, she's got her things that she has to do. And the chief has his, you know, but they all take this piece of paper. They all want our retreat done as soon as possible so they can work towards what we want. So that's how we should be evaluating them. Now, the wordsmithing part of it,
Yeah, and I get that piece. And I really do think this is a language thing, because I think what we're looking at ultimately is exactly your point, but the additional point is sometimes there's some aspects of that don't get captured in those goals.
Right.
Like the working relationship with council is not necessarily something you put into an annual work goal for your person or your council goals. So that's what I think I'm hearing the request is that we cover both territories here.
Okay.
Yeah, so I agree. I think it's an and. Yeah, so thank you. See, if you had cut through it, we wouldn't have had to spend those last 5 minutes.
I'm sitting here going, oh my gosh.
Same way, Mayor.
I know.
Fine.
And I bet you really wish you were just going to develop this whole process together as a group. No, I won't do that from you.
All right, thank you.
All right, let me ask this question, which is a different question. So rating systems, we could spend hours and hours on this. Now, what I heard from you last time was numerical rating systems were not a hit. And quite frankly, at this level, I don't recommend numericals. So typically what it is more of some kind of language piece that makes those distinctions so that, you know, back to what's my 2 versus your 4, that we can say, yeah, we have agreement around a descriptor of what meeting some expectations is, or high performance, or whatever language we put with that. But the real question for you is, what are your thoughts on how many ratings categories you would like to have? This is always the popular topic, and everybody has favorites.
4, please.
I can see why you spend so much time on this is because you can spend an hour on each one of these points.
Exactly. Yeah. That's what I usually do.
And from my perspective, and
yes,
I'm kind of old school, I'm kind of like where Joyce is, you know.
Stop.
The only evaluation I have to pass is the Social Security in the mail on the 3rd of the month, you know. That's the only one I have to pass.
It is a pass or fail system.
And I'm passing it pretty good. But it looks too busy. All of this whole thing looks really busy. And I would like this, and I realize we're working on this and trying to come up with a plan, but I'd like to shrink that plan so it's kind of simple. You get too complicated because in reality, these individuals have 9 employers.
Yes, they do.
And, you know, that's, God bless you.
I agree with you. You couldn't have said it better.
You did,
No.
it's true.
So I've heard 1 vote for 4 ratings.
I also like the 4.
4?
Non-numerical.
Non-numerical?
We have another one.
I can tell you why.
4?
Yeah. So I like the non-numerical. So I have my own system. Someone gave me a 3-point system to do for my facility manager, and it was painful. There's so much in between the does not and meets, and if all you have is does not, meets, and exceeds, there's too much in between does not and meets. There's that partially meeting. And so I think I like the word partially instead of inconsistently.
Okay.
I like that wordsmith choice.
That's just me.
Okay. All right. Anybody have a strong desire for something different than 4? And somebody else want numbers? Do I have any numbers people here? No. Okay.
Are we going to argue standards over expectations?
I don't like.
Oh,
nobody cares.
no,
Joyce,
I'm going to
what
bring
do
you.
Joyce, what would you like? Standards or expectations?
Just like your wordsmithing to my ma'am. And
let me bring back some
I
best.
like expectations.
I like expectations.
Okay. Yeah.
If I had to choose, I'd
what are we
like
calling it? Expectations. Expectations.
Expectations. All right. And if I find some cool new language out there, I'll bring that forward too, because that is an area that's kind of always changing and growing, and sometimes those language pieces are better. Yeah. Oops. All right. Stakeholder feedback. You already said that this is an important piece for you. And I know that Heather also expressed a desire, and I think Joanna expressed a desire for stakeholder feedback too. So the real challenge here, is, first of all, when would you like it in the process? The typical answer is you want it ahead of time, so it's something you can consider again as part of your process from that standpoint on that. The only thing that some organizations use a 360-degree evaluation. It's not really as an evaluation tool, but they use it more as a developmental tool with folks. Those are the only ones that I know that don't bring it in at the beginning of the evaluation system for consideration, where it's really just for the employee's growth and not something that your ratings are based upon. But what I heard from you is you want feedback, and they want you to have feedback from people that work with them. So, so I'll assume it's the beginning, unless I hear otherwise from that. And then the types of stakeholders that you want to hear from.
So we're talking about the people that they do business with. Joanna's easy for me because she has, residents coming in nonstop. I'm not sure who the stakeholders are when I'm thinking of the city manager. So I think you need to clarify to me.
Yeah, I'll give you some models, because again, it's all over the board. There's no best practice in council evaluations in my experience, so everybody does their own thing. Some of the models I've seen, some organizations, it's very limited. It would be only the people that report directly to the person report. One of the municipalities that I've done some work with, they do all the top department directors here, right, not division, and then they actually get some feedback even from the next level down, sort of those division managers, because they're more operational typically than your department directors. Then they would also hear from other peers, like the attorney, if the judge works closely, depends on the relationship there, the clerk, and then sometimes they even have a few sprinkling of maybe citizens that work on a more regular basis. Could be people from important boards and commissions, planning commission. There's kind of a sprinkling of folks from the outside. So that's kind of the broadest model I've seen. Others, it's more typically just department directors and other peers in the organization at the peer level on that. But we can do it in whatever way makes sense to you. We can also literally ask these folks to come up with their best list and then bring that back to you and have you sort of tweak from there, which would actually be my recommendation to you, is because they have probably a better insight into who makes sense, and then you can say, oh yeah, that makes sense, or I don't think we got coverage here, there, or the other way.
I love that idea.
And I'm going to ask them for positions, not people specifically.
Yeah.
Okay? The other way that I've seen is some organizations actually purchase a tool that's already been created by an organization. It's gone through appropriate testing on that, but it usually is a pretty generic thing. I think you saw a sample of it when you were deciding which way to go here from Employers Counselor, that shows you topics that are some of these soft skills. They're great tools because they have all the research and all the pieces that have done. Other councils, they want more of a tool that reflects on something that's a little more homegrown, but reflects more the stuff that is covered in the specific evaluation tool that you're creating. Both models make total sense. There's pros and cons or both. So this is really your preference where you think you would get the best information. Yeah, so it would literally be designed to your thing. What we would probably do is we would design your tool first, and then some shortened version of that would be sent to folks so that they would be giving you feedbacks on all the categories and areas that you're already evaluating your council appointees on. Yeah.
Are you going to be doing, well, let me back and say, when we came to our last council meeting, you indicated that there was going to be a working group that continued to look at some of these questions and figure out some of the answers. Is that still the plan?
Well, so what the actual is the plan is that I today take information from today and create a first draft of what both a tool and a process would look like based on your feedback so far. Then meet with this working group, and when we have the concrete thing in front of us, we have a few sessions to tweak it from there before we bring it back for full council's ultimate final tweaking on that. So our ability to get deeply into these topics outside of saying, oh, this isn't making sense here and there. I mean, it's not going to be like we can spend hours and hours doing a philosophical discussion on goal setting, but we can look at it and say, oh, this doesn't look like the direction we're going to go. We would recommend proposing a different approach to it. So that felt very lawyerly. I apologize for that piece of it. All right. No opinion on this? Okay, well, I'll bring you something. You don't know what you're going to get as a matter of that. Now, you brought up the next topic very appropriately. Do you want your feedback to be anonymous, or do you want folks to be identified?
They're identified.
Can you have both? Let them decide. They have the choice to remain anonymous, and we appreciate your feedback.
Well, that's probably.
I know it's.
Yeah, I think that would probably make a challenge for the data. My guess is you have to choose one system or the other. Here are the pros and cons that I've heard, and you can add into these. The pros of the anonymous system is especially for people that report directly to folks. You know, there's a certain level of, yikes, if I have something negative to say about my boss, I'm setting myself up for retaliation. So will people be truly forthcoming with you if it is open? The downside of these anonymous systems, though, is they can become a real gotcha. People use it as a way to whack and run and not take responsibility. So those are, like I said, there is no perfect, I wish there was a happy answer on anonymous versus not anonymous, but there are definitely pros and cons of both of them.
Can we, if we're rolling out a new system, can we teach appropriate feedback and not appropriate feedback?
Because I would want to create a safe space where if you have something to say about my performance, that there's a way to say it in a professional way. But anonymous surveys, it's just like the internet. People just go in such a terrible way, where if they were frustrated about the timing of a project, they can say that professionally, still get their feedback across. Like you can almost say, like, say this, don't say this. Here's a good example, here's a bad example, here's a way you can give feedback, and here's the crappy way to do it. And that way, we teach them how to do it?
Yeah, I mean, that'd be really up to Heather to decide if that was.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
that's appropriate. And I think as
we move into next year and really focus on the culture development work that I've talked about previously, that's an important piece of it, because I know with our current evaluation system, I don't think that feedback mechanism is as robust as it could be. And I have heard concerns expressed to me in the time that I've been here about what that looks like. And my expectation is that any feedback that's given at a staff level, even between myself and all of you, that it's constructive, because that really ties back to a coaching and mentoring philosophy, and that's where it's positive and productive for the organization and the community as a whole. Some people are really good at it, some people aren't, but I think it's certainly something that can be taught, and then from my perspective reinforced by me as city manager throughout the organization.
Yeah, I mean, people, I agree with you, it's a combination of people being trained, but it's also about having a culture of trust. And if people feel trustworthy, they're willing to do it. So I applaud you for taking on the identified, because I think that speaks to the culture trying to develop too. So, okay, beautiful. Anything else on stakeholder feedback that would be helpful?
Yeah.
Something that you like. All right, now we get to the timing issue.
Let's not get carried away right now. Let's not get carried away. Don't push your head too big.
As you can see, the experts, and you have said this to me last week, you want to turn this into a more regular thing so that it can be an ongoing conversation. So I've already heard that. But I do want to talk a little bit about what makes sense in that realm for you. Is something like a organization, some organizations are doing it quarterly, some are doing it like every 4 months, some are doing it twice a year. And usually the ones when they're doing it multiple times a year, it's not like the big full process during that time. It's more check-ins in those middle times. So you can have the conversation, check in on goals, kind of updates, but not expecting you all or your appointees to try to go through a full-blown system. During those times.
Is what you're
yeah, those middle ones are much more informal. It's really just a check-in to say where you're at with goals, you know, what kind of resources, what support are you getting from us or need from us, giving an update on things. If there's areas of concern that are already showing up for council, to be able to sit in a room and say, hey, we are not getting the kind of communication from you, or we are concerned about the direction this is going on. Yes?
So I love the idea of doing these more informal check-ins throughout the year. I think it's probably better for all of us. I just want to get very, very clear as far as who is going to be doing those check-ins and who's responsible for initiating them. Because what I don't want is one or two members of council going off on their own and having these conversations when we're all members of the performance appraisal committee. So just, I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but I do think we really need to be clear about how we're managing this piece, as well as the pieces that could potentially come down the road in the event that there is something that needs to be approved upon.
every 4 months is fine.
Every 4 months?
If somebody wants to be on the, it's a bigger situation.
Okay. Yeah, and what most of the municipalities that I work with have done is they have some kind of committee that manages just making sure the process is happening, but the actual conversations are with the full council. So I'm interpreting that something along those lines would be what you all would be looking for in that, which makes sense, yeah. So, okay, great. Also then, just that, or step back in there earlier, did we take care of the concern about if there's an ongoing discussion about goals, that the goal setting, because this is the challenge that councils have, is, you know, your council appointees have their evaluation whenever it's in the contract, but that may not fit with your regular annual setting of goals. But if we're having an ongoing conversation of goals, does that take care of that concern?
I think so.
Okay. Any other thoughts or concerns or desires with the time of year in which you have your evaluation conversations? I believe now it's by contract, right? It's written into your contract, and is it going to be specific? Everybody's different?
That's true for you too, Joanna, right? You have an anniversary date, and so the timing of your evaluations in the fall.
That's the way it should happen, but I don't know.
Is it by your contract? I'm just curious if that's been council's preference.
So typically what we've done is the attorney, the judge, and Joanna have the annual review, the October, November timeline. And then the city manager would get their 6 month. And then we have attempted to move that over to the annual. So even though your annual would be August, we were trying to move everybody to the
same
annual.
time of year,
You know,
common review day.
Right, so everyone would have the same one.
Okay.
And we haven't had that discussion.
Is
yet.
council's
You know, but
preference to go
that's
to a
something that-
common review day?
But that was something we have done in the past.
Yeah, right, and this is always the challenge in organizations, and there, again, pluses and minuses. In some ways, you get to think about it and all of them at the same time frame, but that also can be a lot to be doing all at once, too. So there can be value with doing them at different times of the year. So I don't have any best recommendation for you. It's what your preference is on that topic.
Well, our thought process was, since we only had 4 to evaluate, it was easier to do
Easier
them all at the
to do a
same
common
time.
review day?
But, you know, whatever everybody wants to do, that's fine too. We do 3 right now at the end of the year. So.
At the end.
Well, in October, November, you know, the judge, you know, the 3 you know, they all come in, you know, we all evaluate them.
I missed that window. I think that's kind of back to what
It
Jenny
was always
kind
at
of-
the end of the year.
We haven't done
So
it now.
their raises, or whatever it might be, would be starting in January then, so.
That makes sense. If
Okay.
that's of a fiscal year.
So we'll look at that piece then on comment. All right. Then the last topics I was hoping to hear from you right now is, first of all, who facilitates the process each year? Some of the municipalities that I know, some hire an external person to do it. Sometimes it's the city clerk, sometimes it's the HR executive. Any thoughts on what you would like us to build into this system?
Will you be helping to facilitate
Review?
So my contract for this project is to design it for you, but then certainly you can hire me or someone like me to come in and do an annual facilitation, kind of do the making sure you get all the forms, to be the person to help guide you and to do your work. I do that work for some municipalities. Yeah, and there's other people like me that do that kind of work.
And I included funding in the 2019 budget for an outside facilitator.
I prefer that. I think this way it's just a mess.
It's just been a mess.
Cleaner.
So.
Yeah, in fact, the reason I got hired by one of my municipalities is because the poor HR director had to sit in on the the evaluation of her boss, and it was uncomfortable for everybody. So yeah, great.
I like that.
And now, what would you like the role of council's subcommittee to be? Like I said, a lot of times, and I think I heard from that last discussion, they can be the ones that make sure the process is going to happen and make tweaks to the process over here, but really it's council's role to do the actual evaluation. Is that the design?
From a subcommittee to a full committee.
Okay.
We did
Like
talk
official.
about that, yeah. We didn't vote on it, but everybody agreed. Did we vote on it?
I think we did, yeah. Okay, so council is the full, now does that mean council, the committee, I'm talking about the people that actually make sure every year that you've got the, if you're going to use an outside facilitator, that we've got that person on board. It's all the logistics kind of pieces of a subcommittee
We need a
sometimes.
subcommittee to do logistics.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Or like to another thing I think subcommittees could do would be like change anything.
That's been the other thing I've seen is they're the ones that come forward with recommendations.
To council.
Okay. I'm hearing all council.
All councils.
Okay, we're good with that. We can do that. All right, the other topic that came up last time was what you want to do with your contract employees.
Something similar.
That's true.
So again, it depends. Now, is your municipal judge, does she do judgeship for lots of people or just for you guys?
No, she has several people.
Okay. So my experience with a lot of both the attorneys and the judges that serve multiple ones, it's a less robust thing. It's more just annual discussion of the contract with sometimes council saying, here's the data we need, so that's written into kind of the contract agreement. This is the kind of communication we need from you, but council doesn't typically do a full written evaluation of them because you're basically contracting with their company versus with the person specifically. But we can look at other models for you. If you still want to do a full evaluation of those two roles, then we can just fit them in with what we're doing with these two roles. Your attorney and your judge sound like they're similar. The judge sounds like she's an attorney, and if she's doing it for multiple localities, then she to me is more of a, I'm hiring her company, even if it's just her, you're hiring her company to do the work. So it's less. But if you want to do a full robust evaluation with those roles, we can continue to design it that way.
Less robust.
Less robust. I bet you'd like some thoughts on what you do want to do with that.
And with the judge, she has come in and actually presented to the entire council a list of her accomplishments and what she has done through the year. So we have something in hand that we can evaluate her on. And some things, I mean, are she has gone over and above. And I'm just using her. You know, such as she was helping with the Justice Center, which has nothing to do with the courtroom, you know, so those are things how we can evaluate her.
Yeah, okay. Let me come up with some good recommendations from you. I'll look at what some of the other municipalities are doing on that and get you some ideas on what might be that piece. Because I also know, especially with the judge, because my guess is none of you spend any time with the judge. That's an even harder one to get your hands around. That's my experience for most of the organizations.
Several of us go and watch her.
Watch her. Oh, good.
Sure.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Good for you.
So,
I don't always hear that in my municipalities, so good for you.
I think it's appropriate.
Good. All right. Any other topics before we bring back, other than we need to figure out who's going to be on my working team to help me look at the drafts before we bring it back? Everyone's like, not me, thank you very much.
So let's go back to the evaluation committee, which is the council.
Yes.
So who is the leader then? Is it the mayor? Is she the one that she or he is the one that says to the city manager, go and get the facilitator? Is she the one that prompts those things, or is it a group outside of the committee? So that's a question for me.
So I've seen it done many different ways. Sometimes it's literally on somebody's work list already, one of your appointees, just to say, ask council the question and get those questions answered. Sometimes there is like a subcommittee that is literally, that's what they're assigned to do. It's their job every year to say, okay team, time for us to get moving on evaluations. We're going to work with the manager to find out who we're going to bring in as our external facilitator this year. So again, it's your choice from that standpoint. Is there any wishes?
I would prefer that it's not the mayor or the council. I think that there's too much turnover in elected officials. So then, and I think that this time this really created an issue with the evaluation committee and everything. I just think this goes back to the first question, who facilitates the process each year. I would rather have it be one of the employees or a facilitator, and not the subcommittee and not the council members.
So maybe more the model where annually one of these two, it's their job to get with council and say, usually this time of year we're working on evaluations. Can we move forward with getting the facilitator in place to do your process? Okay.
Yeah, it's just a scheduling piece.
Yeah.
Some organizations do more than that. There's subcommittees, they do a little hybrid, because they do like, sometimes I see in groups where a subcommittee of council members comes back and verifies, do we like the process? Do we need to do any updates to the thing? They just serve as kind of the moderators of the topic for the council. They don't make decisions for the council, they moderate it for the council. Okay. All right. So, you don't have to answer this question right now, but I will ask that you get with Heather in the next day or two. But I do need some amount of you to come back and do some of the sausage making with me after I put together a first draft. They'd be willing to meet with me a couple times before we bring it back for a final council decision making.
Are you interested right now, or do you want to wait and think about it and get back together?
I'm not going to commit anything I may not be here.
Who are we?
Why don't we do that?
Oh,
Yeah, we'll just get back with Heather. How's that?
Yeah,
Are we accepting nominations?
Couple
on the
weeks.
floor?
Get it done.
We are not.
All right, other topics of either concern or thoughts that have come up from either of our day's discussions? No? Okay.
That was great.
May I ask for the appointees if they have any additional thoughts or
Of
things
course.
they would like to bring up?
Yeah.
Just to put you on the spot.
The spot.
Yes, on the
Anything
spot.
that's come up?
Joanna, what else do you need?
What else?
We could add emojis to it.
That would be better.
Stars, number of stars.
Yes, right.
No, nothing comes to mind based on the discussion this evening, so.
And I'll just take you one more back to that list to see if there's anything that that list evokes. It's like we didn't either talk about it, or you feel like the conversation did not meet up with the criteria that you were articulated to me last week.
No, it was well done. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you all, and I appreciate your attention to a topic that's both hard and not nearly as riveting as your last presentations.
Thank you, Joe, for all your work.
Yeah,
I appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay. You have anything else tonight?
Just a couple of things for council. I have letters that I'd love if I can get signatures tonight. On the legislative committee had asked Susan and I to draft letters to each of the newly elected officials and those who sought re-election. So we have letters for our U.S. congressmen, our state level officials, our county level officials, including RTD board members. So there's, I think, about 20 plus letters over here on the table. If you don't mind spending a little time to do that, that would greatly be appreciated.
So what does the letter say? Basically, I mean, just as a...
It's a congratulatory letter. And so it's a congratulatory letter, and then an emphasis on Northglenn. So we wrote it a couple different ways. It's a customized letter for our elected officials that sought re-election that know our community, and then in particular for Representative-elect, excuse me, I'm getting over a cold, so my apologies. Our Representative-elect Kyle Mollica, being that he served in our community, we wrote it more customized to, based on your firsthand knowledge of our community, this is why we're excited to work with you. And so it's customized for the elected officials that have either served in this area and then overall. So more than happy to look at the letters
No,
before.
I was just wondering,
Okay.
So you could just bring them and just do
an assembly.
One quick question for Doug with the assembly line. Heather, so with the presentation from Adams 12 earlier, they talked about the hotline number, the 720-972-4911.
Yes.
Is there any way that we could get that out to community members? And then also,
Huh? We get to having the connection.
yeah, having the connection, but then also I'm wondering, can we have Debbie reach out to our local businesses too, and just like remind them that there's a hotline number if they see anything suspicious or
For the school?
Yeah, for the schools, that they know how to report anything to the school district if they, because a lot of the kids, they visit everywhere, especially if there's food. Where there's food.
Yeah. I wonder.
Yeah, just so that we're communicating that number out to any way we can.
Every day.
I guess I'm just wondering when a business would call that number.
Well, so for example, actually, I was having a conversation with the owner of Purple Moon, who's right across the way from Vantage Point. And so they were talking about how a lot of kids gather behind their business, and they always try and shoo them away and stuff. But if they saw something that was concerning to them, then they would be able to call the hotline. And not to be like in a very punitive way, but if they saw something that would be concerning, then they know at least who to reach out to at the school district.
We could get some language from Pat Hamilton.
I'm sure they have some type of
Yeah, exactly.
information that they've sent out to businesses, so I can check in with him and see if he has something already developed that we can use, and we can push that out to businesses.
That makes sense. Most businesses are not adjacent to a school.
Exactly.
So they don't need it.
Yeah, they don't need it.
It's like they're gonna call for the
Purple Moon
wrong
is, yeah.
reasons. Come get these kids out of my Taco Bell. We don't want that.
Yeah, no.
And then the last thing that I had was just a reminder about Noel Northglenn this Friday evening at the Recreation Center. Hope everybody can make it. It should be a really fun evening.
Okay, all right, that's it. We're adjourned. Thank you.